I am Nicole Imgrand, the owner and director of Rivers Edge Counseling Center, and I am really looking forward to today's topic. I have 4 kids between 10 and 14. I know they're older than Lindsey's kids, but the question still is there, no matter how old your kids are. What do you tell them and how? If you aren't familiar with Rivers Edge Counseling Center, we are in St. Albert, although these days we're doing video counseling from wherever people find a quiet, confidential space to connect from their home, their garage, a park bench, wherever that is. And we have 21 psychologists and counselors on our team, as well as 5 students who work with us. And these Wellness Matters talks are something that we've been doing for about 5 years. We do them a couple of times a month, usually from the center, but we've been really happy to take them virtual to try to address some of the concerns and issues that we're all facing right now in this really challenging time. Our presenter, Lindsey McColl, is a member of our team, and she has been a registered psychologist for over a decade, working with adults, children, teens, and families in a variety of different contexts. She has a special interest, which you'll see and will shine through in her presentation today, for supporting parents and caregivers in their everyday parenting struggles, as well as in these extraordinary times, and helping caregivers to build strong relationships with their children that help children to build resilience and that strengthen the attachment and the bond as well. There was a quote on Lindsey's website that I really appreciated, and I thought I'd share, by Nem Calloway. It says, "Sometimes the smallest step in the right direction ends up being the biggest step of your life. Tiptoe if you must, but take a step." And I know this is part of the philosophy that guides Lindsey's work. She works with adults, helping them with anxiety, depression, self-esteem, life transition, which we're all experiencing a lot of right now. And she draws on lots of ways of working to help people meet their goals: narrative, therapy, solution-focused, cognitive behavioral, and certainly play therapy with kids. So with that, thank you, Lindsey, for your presentation today, and we'll let you begin.
Thanks, Nicole. Now I'll share my screen. Okay, so thanks for everyone attending today. I just wanted to put this out there about talking to your kids about tough stuff, because, you know, right now we're dealing with a lot of tough stuff. And so I've tailored this presentation today to deal with mostly what we're talking about right now, the pandemic that everybody is living through. But all of the principles I'm talking about today can be applied to any of the tough stuff. So whether it's a death or an illness in the family, if it's a divorce or separation or some sort of natural disaster that's happening, any of those kind of big things that could be potentially scary for our kids, any of these principles will be helpful in those cases as well. Okay. Sorry, there we go. So what's really important to do first before we have these conversations with our kids is to check in with yourself. So, you know, how do you as a person, as a parent, feel about what's happening in the world? So I imagine, like everybody, we're all feeling a little anxious and stressed and struggling ourselves to cope with all of the change that's happening with this pandemic. So it's really important to do those check-ins and kind of see how you're feeling in the moment. And then checking in on who you have for supports in your life. Do you talk to certain people about your own feelings, whether that's a spouse or a family member, a friend? Do you have your own therapist to support you through some of this stuff that's going on? Just checking in with yourself, you know, do you have enough supports right now with what's going on? And then how do you manage your own stress? And some of us, like myself, I like to do things like cook and bake and garden and all of those kinds of things, which I can still do at home. in the current state of self-isolation and physical distancing, but maybe other people have coping strategies like going to the gym or doing a yoga workout or sitting with their friends at a coffee shop that maybe we're not as able to access in the ways that we used to before. So checking in with yourself about, how do you manage your own stress, and can you access that? Can you do it in a different way? Are you finding alternatives when that's not possible? So those are really important things to do as we're checking in before we talk to our kids. The first thing would be to be calm and neutral. And so that's where that check-in really comes in handy. So when you're checking in with yourself is like, are you feeling anxious and stressed? If you are, maybe it's not the right time to talk to our kids, because we want to make sure that we're calm and neutral when we do those talks. Or maybe we just need to actively calm and center ourselves, and that will be enough. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can calm and center yourself. Maybe meditation is something you're interested in. Maybe you want to try a body scan. I'll just let you guys know that I have prepared a handout as well that I believe Nicole's going to be posting to the website after this talk is over sometime. It'll be attached to my bio page, I believe. So I've given you guys a bunch of strategies, different apps that you can try out that you can use to help center yourself. As well, one of my colleagues, Shireen Seymour, did a talk about centering herself, and that webinar, if you missed that one, is posted to her bio page. So she actually goes through a couple of the different exercises and leads you through that. So that might be an interesting one for you guys to check out and learn some new tools that way as well. When we talk to our kids, it's really important to choose our time to talk really wisely. We want to avoid close to bedtime, because when kids are getting ready for bed, the last thing we want to do is talk about something big and potentially worrisome that could impact their sleep or make them feel fearful right before bed. It also doesn't allow for any questions or them to sit and process that information at all. So we want to do it sometime earlier in the day. And just like ourselves as parents, where it's important for us to be calm and relaxed, we also want our kids to be calm and relaxed for those talks. So not choosing a time where they're bouncing off the walls or when they're feeling upset or highly emotional. Those would be times to avoid, but choosing a time where they're also relaxed and calm as well. What's really important is, especially because we're a month into this, what we want to do is start with a question. Your kids may have all sorts of different sources of information on what's going on around them. Maybe it's the internet, maybe it's when they were in school and teachers were talking about this, their friends were talking about it, maybe it was daycare, or maybe they're at the grandparents' house. Sometimes as parents, especially with the older kids, it's hard to know what sources of information they're exposed to and what information they're actually getting already. So if we frame it with a question, what do you know about what's happening in the world right now? And of course, you can tailor that question to your child's age and developmental level. That can be really helpful to give you a snapshot of what information they have, and do they have any gaps in their knowledge? Is there something that maybe they're confused about? Maybe they don't have all the information that they need, or maybe they have some misinformation that would be really important to correct. So asking that question is really, really important for those reasons. And it will also give you a snapshot of the language and the terminology that your child is using. So for example, I know Nicole mentioned I have young kids. My oldest is 4. And so he calls what's going on the big sickness. So that's how he's framed it in his mind. And so we run with that, and we don't correct him. We don't say, it's a virus or it's called COVID-19. It's just helpful to use what he's using in terms of terminology, because it's appropriate and it's to his developmental level. And that's how we talk about it. And I've already kind of touched on this, but just using that developmentally appropriate language is important. So like I said, a 4-year-old might not understand such an abstract concept as germs or a virus or something that you can't really see. That could be difficult for some younger kids to get. But what we want to do is just tailor those terms and the language that we use to talk to our kids around their developmental understanding of the world. I also have included, I'm sure a lot of you have seen that experiment you can do with pepper and soap and water to explain germs to younger kids. And it's kind of a fun experiment. So I've attached a link for that if you guys are interested in checking that out as well. Especially for young kids, we want to use simple and concise language. We don't want to overload them with too much information. And for young kids, maybe we just want to talk about, it's important to wash our hands, and we wash our hands before we eat, and we wash our hands after using the bathroom, and things like that. So you also want to talk about the changes to any routines or schedules that are happening. So for all kids, I know there's been huge changes, and for parents too, parents are working from home a lot now. Kids aren't going to school anymore. Maybe they're not seeing their friends for play dates. Maybe they're not seeing their friends for hangouts and teens, all those kinds of things. So it's really important to talk about those changes and give them the information about why those things are happening, and then checking in on that. For older kids, we just want to give as much information that's required for them to understand what's going on. Again, like I said, we don't want to overload them with too much information. And then we just want to answer any questions that they might have that they're wondering about or they're confused about. This one's probably the most important one. If you take home anything from this presentation, this is the one I want you to take home. So it's really, really important to be honest and factual with our kids. Often as parents, we want to protect them from everything, from especially scary information that's out there, but avoiding the truth or telling white lies or half-truths, it's only going to confuse your kids, and it's not going to lead to building that trust. So for example, it might be really tempting to say something like, there's a virus going around, but everything's going to be back to normal soon. We're completely safe and you don't need to worry about it. So that can be really tempting to say, but in those statements, it's not allowing for your kids to express any emotion, and it's not allowing them to ask any questions or to wonder about their own safety or what's happening. So, and also kids are really attuned to the emotional climate and your emotional state of being as a parent. I'm sure you notice when you're feeling escalated or elevated yourself, your kids start escalating because they're picking up on that energy in the room, and they pick up on stress and your concerns. They'll also start filling in gaps if they don't have the information that they need, or they might look to other sources that may be less desirable. So they might be Googling things or talking to their friends and maybe getting some misinformation out there that wouldn't be very helpful for them. And if we are honest and factual to our kids, then it's going to encourage them to come to you when they have concerns or when they have questions or when they're feeling fearful. And that's what we really want to encourage is them coming to you for that information, because you can be the gatekeeper then and give them what they need. And just with this current situation, we don't know everything, right? We don't know how long we're going to be isolating for. We don't know a lot about the virus itself. So if your kids have questions that legitimately you don't know the answer to, that's okay. And it's okay to say so. And if you do say, I don't know that answer, you could say something like, we're working really hard to get those answers. And once we do, I can let you know, or I can research that and get back to you, or let me talk to your dad, let me talk to your mom about that. You can say those things and just make sure that you follow through in those cases, because again, that will build that trust with your kids. Once you have those conversations, it is really important to check in with your kids again and again later. And depending on how long we go through this again and again and again, we don't want to over check in. So we don't want to do this every day. But it is important to kind of take your child's cues. So if you start noticing changes in behavior, or if you start noticing that they're increasingly emotional about certain things, or those would be cues where you need to be checking in as a parent. I'm wondering if you're feeling confused about what's happening, or tell me what you're feeling right now. Do you have any questions about what's going on or the changes in our routine? They need that time to process the information, and things are going to come up over and over. So it's important to not just have this conversation once, but checking in on it every now and again, especially when you notice your children might be struggling. And then the last principle I'll talk to you guys about is it can be really, really helpful and will really help your kids to cope, is to come up with some ways to empower them. So trying to brainstorm with them, ways that they can help. So can they help in the family routines? Are they old enough to be in charge of wiping doorknobs down or light switches? Could they have a job to help keep the family safe and those kinds of things? Can you give them some sense of control by offering choices as much as possible? So for young kids, it might be something as simple as, do you want grilled cheese or a turkey sandwich for lunch? So you just want to give them as much choice as possible and as much agency as possible so that they can feel empowered and have a sense of control. And then finding positive ways to cope together is one of the really key ways that you can empower your kids. So I know I've noticed in my community, I'm sure you guys have as well, that there's a lot of sidewalk chalk happening out there as the sidewalks become more and more dry, with some really cool positive messages for the community and for everybody else. So finding ways that your kids can help spread messages of hope and help cope together can be really, really helpful. I've also included a few different activities you guys can do as a family to cope together. So I've got a relaxation script on the handout for young kids. I've got some yoga that you guys can do as a family. And then there's actually a really cool exercise for kids and adults. There's separate ones, but you guys can create a COVID-19 time capsule, and it goes through a bunch of visuals and things that you can fill in. And that can be a really fun project as a family to go through so that you guys can cope together. And then you guys can open it up later on and see what that's like. And that might be really fun for the kids as well. Before we close out today, I just want to leave you guys with a couple things to remember. So behavior with kids is communication. So what you see, the behavior is really just that tip of the iceberg. What's happening for them underneath all of that is any number of different things, a lot of big emotions, maybe some confusion, maybe they just don't have the words to talk about what's happening. So you're going to see that in increased behavior with them, maybe some withdrawal behavior. It could look like anything. So when you start noticing that, like I mentioned, just check in with your kids and see what's going on for them. Sometimes interpreting that behavior can be helpful for them. So, I'm noticing that you're struggling. I wonder if you're feeling confused about the changes that are happening, or I wonder if you're feeling sad about not seeing your friends anymore. And sometimes just giving them those words, even if they're wrong, your kids can correct you then. But giving them the words to talk about what's happening for them can start those conversations and those check-ins and kind of get to the root of what's really happening. And then we talked about protecting our kids. So this is the way to protect them. So the news, if we have that on in the background, or, the other day I turned on the radio just to listen to some music with my kids for lunchtime, and every commercial and every news brief was about COVID-19. And so I had to turn it off just for my own state of being, because I don't want to hear it all day, every day, but just for my kids too. I don't want them exposed to that information because it's at a level that is for adult understanding. So developmentally, it might not be as appropriate for them to hear all of that as well. So we also want to avoid having those adult conversations. So when I said checking in with yourself and talking to your supports, how can we do that in a way that's outside of where our kids can overhear? So during a nap for young kids, or after bedtime for older kids, or maybe you go out for a walk and talk on the phone to your friends, so that you can continue to get that support. I know we're all feeling a little housebound and not like we don't have maybe as much privacy as we used to. So just finding those private times to talk to your own supports about what's going on for you, to shelter your kids from hearing information that might be above their understanding level. And then last, I just want to remind everybody to be kind and gentle with yourselves. You know, there is no such thing as a perfect parent. If you meet one, let me know. We don't have all the answers. We all have bad days. We all struggle to cope at times. And to just acknowledge that for yourself, and to just be kind to yourself, and realize that, you know, tomorrow's a new day. I'm going to try harder next time. And sometimes just admitting that to your kids can go a long way, and especially teens. Because oftentimes our kids can view us as having all the answers and being perfect in certain ways. But if you say something like, you know, mommy made a mistake, I raised my voice, I'm really working hard on that, and I'm going to take a break next time. Just owning that to your kids can help build that trust, and realize that, you know, it is okay to make mistakes, and it's okay for them too. It's a really good role modeling that you can do for your kids. So I just want to end with that note of, you know, be kind and gentle to yourselves as well.
Thanks a lot, Lindsay. If you want to just stop your screen share, we'll go to the chat. If people want to start to post some questions in the chat and the Q&A, we'll take a look at those and spend some time. I want to say I really loved where you started, Lindsay, in the part that's actually, I find one of the most challenging parts as a parent, which is my own self-care and self-regulation. And it just really reminded me of mirror neurons. And if people aren't familiar with them, it's a really interesting read online, just how we're wired to register other people's emotional reactions and the powerful influence it has over our own. So going to the last part of your presentation, when I get kind of hard on myself about whether I'm giving the kids everything they need in this, I remind myself that the most difficult part is also the simplest part. If I'm feeling calm and grounded, that, you know, that'll be reflected in their own emotional experience too. But
that's often the hardest part.
I know it is. Yeah. Great. We've got a question here. Yeah, she's asking if there are any specific suggestions you have for older kids, you know, like over 11 years old, she's asking. Yeah. Would any of your recommendations be different, or other things you could add?
Yeah, so I mean, all the principles would be the same. You would just kind of tailor those conversations to what your child can understand. So over 11, I mean, they're going to have a good understanding of maybe viruses and what's happening out there. And again, just being honest and factual with them is really important. So when they have those tough questions of, you know, am I going to get sick? Or, you know, what about my grandparents, and how worried should I be about them? It's going to be hard, but you say things like, you know, we're doing our best to keep everybody safe. This is how we're doing it. We don't know how long it's going to go on for, but again, just being as honest as you can be with your kids, especially older kids too. They're going to know a lot more, right? And so they're going to pick up on when you're maybe avoiding that truth a little bit, or downplaying it a bit more.
Yeah. Thank you. Another question here. Any specific advice for dealing with tears and the really high emotions? This person is saying that their 6-year-old only child is crying frequently. They're active, they play, exercise, walk, dance, and talk a lot. So there's lots of movement, it sounds like, in their house. But I know he's missing interactions with friends and is highly frustrated. Short of the normal hugging and reassuring, how can we best deal with the more frequent tears and not make him feel bad for crying? Yeah.
I mean, all we can do is be there for our kids when they're feeling those big emotions, and validate those, and say, you know, I'm guessing you're feeling quite sad that you can't see your friends, and I know how hard that is. And then trying to find some ways to maybe increase those connections. So can you do a virtual play date of some sort? Do you have neighborhood kids that, you know, you could have driveway play dates, so everybody sticks on their own driveway, but you're around and near people at a safe distance. And then just, yeah, giving your child those words can be really helpful, and being calm and grounded yourself when the tears or the escalations happen is probably the best thing that you can do. It's going to probably happen more and more as we go through this, and it gets to be longer and longer. I mean, we're going to go through phases where our kids can cope well, and then phases where our kids are going to struggle more. And so doing as much as you can together as a family to increase their coping would be helpful as well. And I hope some of those resources on the handout will help as well.
Yeah, and we'll post this afternoon the handout for sure on your bio page, and also a recording of your presentation on the blog too. So if people know of other parents who might benefit from it, you're welcome to share it. Just looking to see if we have any other questions here. I'm not seeing any. Oh, there's one here. Thank you very much. Any suggestions on how to speak to older teenagers who are informed on their own, by watching the news and social media? What are good types of discussions? And she's saying that her kids do want to talk about it a lot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think honoring that for older teens who have that knowledge and who have that understanding and are hearing it from all sorts of different sources, staying as connected as you can with your teens about what they're hearing and questions that they might be having would be really important. And then correcting anything that maybe they're hearing that might not be as accurate would be important too. So what are they hearing from their friends? What sources are their friends using? You need to be kind of that gatekeeper. So if your kids want to talk about it with them, and just in a way that's supportive and in a way that is really just giving the accurate information. And then emphasizing those positive ways to cope together would be helpful too. So whenever those subjects get brought up and you have those conversations, talking about what we can do about it. What can we, how can we help other people with this? How can you shift that energy into something positive?
Mm-hmm. I've been thinking with my kids lately, and because of this especially, what kind of conversations to have with them to help them become better able to critically think about the information that they digest. How do they learn to tell the difference between opinion and fact, and what are reliable sources of information versus unreliable, because it's all just out there for them.
Yeah, there's just so much to sift through.
Well, it's hard for us to know sometimes what's reliable too, right? So yeah,
Absolutely.
Great suggestions. Yeah. Just leave it open for another minute here in case there's any other questions. There's a couple of webinars that have just passed that also specifically deal with supporting kids through this. You mentioned Shireen's webinar. A couple of days ago, Andrea did one called Positive Pandemic Parenting, and we'll be posting that to the blog soon as well. And do look to our website. We've got another 16 or 18 webinars coming up still till the end of June. Some of them are for parenting and about kids, but also some for adults, one coming up for couples. And so feel free to join us for any one of those as well. And it looks like that's it for the chat. Oh, sorry, got another question. Great. How much should you be telling a 6-year-old? An automatic question is, do people die? Will you die? He asked us who would be his parents if we both died from this. Oh, just a really good example of how deeply kids can be taking this in. Yeah,
and I mean, those are the tough questions. So those questions you can say, what we know is that this virus is affecting different people in different way. But, if you're part of that lower risk category, you can be honest and say, it's very unlikely that, if I do get sick, that this is going to be more than just kind of a nasty flu or a nasty cold or a nasty sickness, or however you guys phrase that terminology. And that, things are going to probably be okay with that. You can be more honest about that. Older people tend to struggle a little bit more. But yeah, those questions that, are you going to die? What's going to happen if that happens? Those are some really, really tough questions for parents to deal with. And just, like I said, be as honest as possible without scaring them. So you don't maybe want to go down that rabbit hole too far and say, oh, here's your guardians and here's what's going to happen. But just reinforce and reassure your kids that, you know, it's very, very unlikely that that's going to happen. But you're doing all of these measures to stay safe yourself and to keep the family safe, and, you know, focus on those types of things, I would say.
Yeah. I had to smile to myself when you said, talking to them about the difference between older people, because when I've had those conversations with my kids, especially my youngest, I have to remind myself that everyone over 30 is old to him.
Right.
The conversation had to be a little more detailed about different age groups. And yeah. Yeah, that's some great advice. Yeah, and she's saying thank you for that as well. Yeah. Some of the same ones might be on the handout that you're providing as well, but there's a COVID resource page on our website. And I've been really kind of delighted by the creativity that came out really quickly, actually, into the pandemic already, of people writing, making small videos and picture books for really young kids that describe the virus and the situation. So you might want to take a look and take advantage of some of those as well. Someone is just saying this is very valuable and very reassuring. Yeah, good. Well, I think we'll end it there. I want to thank everyone for your time, especially as I know it's a long weekend. I hope you found some ways this weekend to make it feel like a weekend and not just Groundhog Day again. That's a bit of a challenge, and find some family traditions that you can, or revising family traditions if this is a holiday that you normally celebrate, in ways to make it feel special for you and your families. And just thank you as parents for the work that you're doing. It's never easy to be a parent, and particularly now. You are with your children and supporting them through an unprecedented time, helping to school them. And so please don't underestimate the toll that takes and how important that is. And every investment that you make in your kids always matters. But I really think, especially at this time, the attachment and nurture and care that you give will shape who they are and their experience of all of this. So thank you for what you're doing. And with that, I will say goodbye and wish you well. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Lindsay.